Hello, my name is Brett. I'm the Director of Sales here in San Francisco. Welcome to this talk called What's New in Odoo Studio version 14. So, we're actually celebrating the 4th anniversary of having Odoo Studio this year. Happy birthday, Odoo Studio. I know it seems like only yesterday that the developers whipped up Odoo Studio out of nowhere and they changed the landscape of business software forever. When Odoo Studio first came out, it was pretty amazing because it allowed us to do something we had never imagined being able to do before. Basically automatically generating code without necessarily having to be a developer. Pretty important. Adding custom fields to change your Odoo database was suddenly way more accessible to the public to do. However, in the first version, it wasn't even really drag and drop functionality. It was more like hover and then click and then type in some info. We made some really massive improvements shortly after that with the first minor release. I want to say it was SAS 10.3 or something like that. I don't know. And then each year, though, since then, we've continued to make it a much stronger and much more powerful tool. Adding things like the PDF editing and also the ability to just drag and reposition fields wherever you want. And so going into this new version 14, we already had a very strong offering. In fact, it's so strong that out of all of the Odoo customers in the United States, which is where I work and where I was monitoring the results, out of all those customers that started a subscription since 2017 when we launched Odoo Studio, a full half of our clients have Odoo Studio installed on their Odoo database. It just goes to show you how normal it is to require some customization. Businesses are really unique and they have all sorts of requirements that you can't expect to find in a software that's 100% out of the box. So there's several huge strengths of Odoo Studio. For one, we really believe that Studio cuts down on overall implementation costs and time by spending less time and resources on heavy development. It's not necessarily a replacement for development, but there's a lot of little individual things here and there and that a customer needs both during and after implementation that Studio can solve, and it saves a ton of time along the way. It also allows us to very quickly and very easily tailor our platform to meet the needs of a lot more industries. In other words, we don't need to have our platform preset to address one specific use case because it's so easy to modify Odoo and morph it to meet the specific situation. It makes our software not unlike the chameleon in that regard. And a third advantage, sometimes it's just useful as a very quick proof of concept builder or prototyping tool. Maybe you'll eventually go back and you'll develop the customizations that you need in the way that you prefer, in the style of writing code that you like. But still, Odoo Studio can be amazing to allow you to quickly connect two modules together, for example, or maybe rename some fields, rename some menus, or create a whole new module or create a whole new app from scratch with a fully fleshed out interface just on the fly while you're talking to somebody about their business needs. So anyway, it's already bringing a lot of value to the Odoo ecosystem. So it's a matter of deciding where do we go from there, right? And where did we go? So this year we decided to really prioritize two very big things. We wanted to make Odoo Studio a lot more usable, and we wanted to make it a lot more stable. So instead of half of our customers using Studio, we'd prefer to see that number grow, of course, because we know that the value is there. We know it can help people out a lot. So let's start with an example of that. Last year, with version 13, we enabled a new feature called mass edits in list views. It's been really helpful for a lot of situations. One example that I personally need to do quite often is, let's say that I have 30 customers assigned to one sales rep, and I want to take half of them and assign them to another sales rep. With the list view mass editing feature that we have, certain fields can be very quickly edited by selecting the rows, whatever rows that you want to change, and then you change a single field on any of those rows, and then all the rows that you've selected will change too in the same way. It saves a lot of time. But unfortunately, there wasn't really a quick or easy way to enable mass editing or even inline editing of any sort in any list view before. So it was kind of frustrating for any new list view that you create to not have that. but now we do. So take a look at this flow really quick. Basically, as you can see, we have a list here for a new model of data that I created in Odoo Studio called samples. And let's say I want to change the responsible field on a couple of the rows. So I activate Studio and I go to the View tab because we're changing a property of the full view, and you'll see Enable Mass Editing right there. Cool. So I'm going to get out of Studio, and now it works the way that we want. We'll select a couple of rows, and then we'll choose just one of those rows, and we'll change the field to something else. And then it will change that for all the ones that we selected. Great. Saves a ton of time. Very easy. Similarly, on the subject of list views, we also wanted to give users the ability to control how their lists of data appear by default when you first open a list for the first time. For example, if you're showing a list of sales orders, chances are you want the newest ones up at the top of the list the moment that you jump in. But other lists of data, you might just prefer an alphabetical sorting. So you'll see that right below the new checkbox for enabling mass editing that we were just looking at, we also now have this little sort by section right there, where you can choose which field in the list you want to sort by. Like here we are on contacts, so we could sort by city if we wanted to. And then with this order drop down, we could tell it if we want it to be ascending or descending. And so I'm going to go back in this case to sorting by contact name ascending by default because it makes sense for that model. So for version 14, one thing you might have already noticed by now, if you've checked it out in any capacity, is that we try to make a lot of the ordinary screens and everything that you look at in Odoo a lot more visually oriented, but doing it without interfering with the actual usability of the platform. Because honestly, it's an increasingly visually oriented business culture and world that we live in, and we believe that to make things as usable as possible to the most workers out there, some things can really benefit from having that quick little icon for instant recognition. Obviously, for a long time, Odoo has had the Kanban view, which usually has a big picture icon of either an employee or a customer or a product, something like that, whatever it is relevant to the record. But we decided to bring that same functionality to other places in the platform as well, primarily on the form view, but also on the list view and wherever you use it. So first off, here you can see what we mean by avatar. Any form view in Odoo now lets you hover over at the top right and add an image that can serve as this model's avatar. It's the same thing that we already had on products and on contacts and employees, but now it's finally an option to add to any model with a form view. Now, just to be clear, we always had the add image field type in Studio. So, you were always able to add an image. But that's not exactly the same thing at all, because you'll see that in version 14, the avatar in particular, it specifically gets used in quick displays all across the platform. You'll see that the avatar can appear in list view next to the field name, but it can also show up if you place it on the form view using a many-to-one field. So take a look at this new model I created for samples. There's a big avatar for the sample itself over here, right there. But also this contact down here is using a new many-to-one widget called the many-to-one avatar, which simply displays the avatar next to the name. Up above here, we have a different many-to-one avatar widget being used. This is called the many-to-one avatar user widget. The difference is that since it relates to a user, if you click on it, suddenly you're immediately starting a discuss chat with that user. So it's increased usability from a collaboration perspective. And it shows up in list views too, as you can see right here. So the avatar, it serves several different functions. It's not just that it looks a little bit nicer, it also has functionality built into it. And now you can activate that and use that wherever you want in Studio. Okay, in fact, we've also made use of that avatar icon that I just mentioned within a whole new exciting feature of Odoo Studio, approval roles. This is probably the biggest thing that's going to make the most of an impact, I would say, this year. It's actually pretty cool. Approval role workflows are something that customers of ours always want. And we've been able to do it in the past, by creating user access rules, specific user access rules. But now with this feature, you'll see that it's really easy to configure, and it's a really, really clean and natural workflow that you can use. So take a look here in this workflow I'm about to do. The idea is that we're going to want to prevent your users from confirming a sales order until we have the necessary approval from the sales manager. It's a really common request that we also hear in regards to purchasing, probably more in purchasing. But also in manufacturing and projects, basically, you don't want to move forward with something until somebody approves it. So I'm on a sales order right here. We're going to go ahead and activate Studio, and we're going to click on the Confirm Action button itself. So we're in Studio, click on the button. So now in the button properties, we have a Set Approval Rules checkbox. I'll check that. And it wants us to say what group of users we will require the approval from. It's really important to point out that we can put filter conditions on this based on any field in the model. For example, we might want to point out that we can put filter conditions on this rule based on any the dollar amount, like $1,000. So if it's above 1,000, then we need the approval. And you can have as many rules as you need. So you can have different approval levels. And if you need, you can make it so that more than one person or role needs to approve it. To see how it works, the avatar icon here indicates that we need approval. Since I'm a manager, I can go ahead and approve it. I'll click on that to approve. Cool, it's approved. If you want to, you can revoke it later if you change your mind. Okay, so finally now it can be confirmed, and you can add the little gamification, rainbowification effect for fun. But of course, that's 100% optional. So it's a great new tool to put more control into your processes very easily. In the effort to make Studio a lot more usable in every aspect, we wanted to try to improve the PDF report editor. Any PDF that you generate in Odoo, whether it's a sales order, a purchase order, invoice, or whatever, it can be customized through very basic drag and drop tools in Studio. And it's a pretty unique tool. There aren't a lot of other softwares out there that has the same functionality of Odoo that allows this customization. It's a great tool. It's complex for us because it's not really Python. It's actually QWeb, which is our XML HTML generator. So the same functionality that we use in most of Studio, it doesn't exactly translate to this. We kind of have to develop this independently. So it behaves a little bit differently, but the goal is to gradually make it a lot more usable. And one of the big changes we made based on user demand is it happens the moment that you start to add new fields or blocks to a PDF. Before, the system would ask you to first tell it, where's this field coming from? And it was confusing for a lot of users because most of the time, the field that you want, it's on the model that you're already looking at. It's on the model that the report is related to. But before, you still had to specify it, and it was a little confusing. So now you'll just see in the screenshot that it defaults to the displaying fields from the relevant model that you're already looking at. It basically saves you a step, and it's going to mean a lot less confusion and a lot less getting lost while trying to edit the PDF report. Within the PDF document itself, we focused a lot on one specific area that up to this point wasn't really editable with Studio, but based on user demand, we had to make it editable in Studio. And so yeah, it's actually the address block. You can change which specific fields in the address block display, and now we have a drop-down to choose the type of separator between lines. So I can change it to dash, for example, as you can see, or you can just go to line break, vertical bar, whatever you want. Also, now there's a neat little set of alignment tools down here. So we didn't have that before. And to change the font style, the text actually displays in the preview dropdown, so you know what it's going to look like before you choose it. It's just a big cleanup the feature in general to give you a lot more control over that aspect of PDF reports because customers tend to have preferences in that regard. Okay, so Studio, it's a complex tool, and sometimes people have reported that they did something with it that made the screen look weird all of a sudden, or not do what it's supposed to do, or they had to hit refresh if they wanted to actually continue. I'll admit I've experienced that myself quite a few times, and then I'm just clicking undo, or refresh, or whatever. Okay, so now I'm gonna go through a few little tweaks that we made here and there, all with the goal to make Studio a lot less prone to these little error messages and a lot less confusing to the user. So it's about to get very exciting. Okay. So this is in version 13. Before, if you added new columns to a tab, it used to automatically show left title and right title. But in most cases in Odoo, you don't really need titles for a column. So a lot of times you'd have to remove it by maybe deleting it, but it was called labels, which is a weird way to refer to anything in Odoo. And it was a little awkward. So now this is V14. Now if we add columns, there's no weird titles by default. If you want, you can add titles later, but they're called titles, not labels. Another huge improvement is that columns can now have a conditional invisible status that we didn't have before. That's important because that can hide all sorts of things. And it's important to point out that we've added the same conditional visibility functionality to tabs themselves as well. So that thing that you see out of the box already when you say this product can be purchased and suddenly the purchase tab shows up, we didn't have the ability to enable that kind of interactability in Studio before. Well, now you can. Those are missing pieces. And it's going to make it a lot better now when creating your new tabs, your new columns, your special data, and also, of course, your new apps. Okay, here's a big fundamental change to the way Studio works moving forward. Before, no matter what field type you make, whether it was a text field or whether it was a many-to-one field, HTML, whatever, all the Studio fields had the exact same format before. So here's before in V13. I hover over the field and you can see that it says x_studio_field and then a bunch of gobbledygook. In other words, it didn't matter that this is a monetary field. It just called it an x_studio field. And all Studio fields you make would follow that exact same format. But now, here, this is version 14 instead. Now, if we hover over a similar field, you'll see that the field type is also listed. It says monetary. So now it's a lot easier to keep track of your custom Studio fields, especially if you make a lot of fields in succession, like one after another, and you want to be able to work with them in the back end, but you look at them all in a list and they all look identical and you have to go into them each individually. So now it's in the name of the field. I think that's going to help us a lot with how we actually interact with these fields. One of the biggest little changes we made is to fix one of the biggest issues that people would have with Odoo Studio. It was a common complaint. Basically, if you drop a new field to Studio, it can take a few seconds to generate some code. And if you start doing stuff while it's generating that code, like if you're changing a view, if you click on something else, if you just run out of patience, things can get weird. You can get errors and suddenly you're clicking refresh. Maybe you have to log out and log back in. So here's how it used to work in version 13. I'm going to go ahead and I make a field. Then while it's generating, I'm clicking around, I'm interacting, I can mess it up, I can go crazy, all that kind of stuff. It can honestly really mess with the creation of a new field and it can confuse the system. So here now in version 14, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to add a field and now I can't do anything. It's loading. It's preventing human error. It's blocked. This is a good thing. It's just a safer way to make sure that we don't break the system while we're using Studio. It's a relatively simple fix, but it's going to potentially prevent a lot of frustrating issues. And just in general, it contributes to Studio being more stable. All right, so I've saved one of the biggest improvements for last. Odoo Studio can be used to make new models and make new apps on the Odoo dashboard. But we really think it's an underutilized feature so far. If you have a model that isn't necessarily an app on the dashboard, we often call it a secondary model. And it's something Odoo Studio is actually really great at creating. It might just be a new data table that gives you additional features inside of an app. Like it could be a list of sample records, like I showed you earlier. Or it could be a list of legal cases, or some unique category that applies to your products. Anyway, the use case for secondary models, it goes on and on. There's a lot of need for it. We wanted to make the experience of creating new models and also creating new apps on the dashboard way faster and a lot more user-friendly. We want people taking advantage of this function more. So now in V14, if you go to create a whole new app from scratch by clicking this here while you're on Studio on the main home screen, or if you're inside an app like Purchase or Manufacturing, whatever app, and you activate Studio, you'll now see this little option up at the top to make a new model. We didn't have that before. But anyway, either way, you'll now be greeted by this amazing model configurator screen. What it is, it's basically a bunch of options to choose from that you want your new model to have. It's a wish list of all the types of features and fields that you want your model to have. We have a lot of common presets, kind of like a template for new models to follow. It's kind of like starting a free trial of Odoo, for example, and when it asks you which apps you want it to have. It's the same idea. Or it's like going to a deli where you get to tell them exactly which ingredients you want on your sandwich. And as you can see, after just a few seconds, you generate it, it's going to create a whole new model with all the things that we specified. We have blocks of particular fields, and we have the chatter already activated too. It's a fully functional model we can work with now, saves us several minutes worth of configuration time, and it makes the ultimate tool for quick, usable customization and tailoring the platform to suit your needs. So that's the end of this talk. I hope you agree that V14 of Odoo Studio, it's the most usable and it's the most solid and stable version yet to make you a powerful customizer of your own ERP. Thank you very much.
Q&A after?
Oh, you mean after?
So, hi everybody. Thank you very much, Brett, for your talk. We have received a couple of questions, and please, to all the viewers, continue asking your questions. We will take notice of them as we go through. If we don't manage to answer all your questions, there will be an extended Q&A session which you can join with Brett if necessary. So, first question, is the new approval rule feature working in the accounting app? Brett, can you answer?
Sure, yeah, I can answer that. So the new approval role feature, it applies to basically any of those action buttons that you see, like the big green buttons at the top left. And so examples of that in the accounting app specifically would be like the validate button if you wanted to validate an invoice, or if you needed to register payments. So the general rule is anywhere where you see those kinds of buttons that trigger automated actions or server actions, you can apply the new approval role rule to.
Okay, fantastic. Next question would be, does the user that is configured as an approval gets notified by email when there's a document to approve?
It becomes an activity for them to deal with, and so it's kind of basically it's like getting any sort of activity that you receive. You can set it up so that you do receive an email notification. At the very least, it will pop up by default internally inside the system and saying, you have a new thing to approve up at the top as an activity. That's my understanding of it. I think by default you don't get an email unless you configure it so that you do receive an email. But generally speaking, across the board in Odoo, it's really easy to set it up so that email alerts happen based off of activities or actions that are assigned to new users, or new activities that get assigned to users. Okay. Yeah.
There's another question from Christophe Leray. Can we use the Studio for the point of sale and the website application?
Oh, that's a really good question. Yeah, so still we don't have the ability to use Studio in point of sale, and the reason for that, it's not because we don't want to, it's just that the reason for that is that our point of sale app, it's one of our few things that we have that is totally built in Java or JavaScript, and whereas the rest of Odoo is primarily Python. And the reason why we did that is because that enabled us to allow point of sale to be run on cloud or on premise, or with or without any sort of internet connection, that is. So offline capabilities, because it's built the way it is, it allows for offline capabilities. But unfortunately, we haven't expanded the scope of Studio to allow for that. Studio is primarily a Python editing tool. But any fields that you make with Studio, any customizations you make with Studio on like the product form or on sales, for example, you could use non-Studio tools to develop it so that you're referencing it. For the second part of your question, e-commerce, no, because e-commerce already has its own really good tools for customizing and changing it, but it's pretty easy to reference any Studio created fields or customizations on the website builder. A good example of that we often make use of is if you use Studio to make some custom fields on, say, the contact form or on the opportunity in CRM, you can use the custom form builder tool that we have on our website. And when you're choosing the fields that show up on the form builder, it will allow you to select any of those custom fields that you made in Studio. So long story short, you can easily make custom fields and stuff on the back end. And then on the website builder, on contact forms and things like that, you should be able to reference them pretty easily.
Okay, thank you for that answer. Does the user, this is a question from Elvis Scora, does the user who created the document get, we have had that question before. Can we add image of a customer in avatar automatically? And after that, have any report in which user can see that how many approval is accepted and rejected. So basically have an overview of how many approvals have been accepted.
That's a really good question. Okay, so the first question about can we automatically have an avatar image for the customer? So actually, when I was talking about adding an avatar, that would be like adding it somewhere where it's not already displayed or adding it on a new form. But actually the customer card, the contact records that we have, res.partner, that already has an avatar or icon image. We've had that since, I don't know, version 8 or something like that. And then fairly recently, in the last couple of years, if you use an integration that we have for Clearbit, Clearbit can allow you to automatically pull in.
Okay, Brad, I'm afraid I have to stop you here. The time is unfortunately over. But just to our viewers, there will be a link in the last comment of the chatter, which you can go to follow to a separate room with Brad to continue discussing these questions. Okay, sorry for the short time. Thank you very much, Brad.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Appreciate you watching and enjoy the rest of today and all the talks tomorrow.